Welcome everyone. My name's Louise Regan. I'm Vice Chair of PSC and I am going to be chairing this online session, which is about responding to Israeli illegal settlements and the annexation proposals. We've got a number of speakers. I'll introduce them as we get to them. Just before we start, although most of you look like you're quite sorted with Zoom meetings, as the vast majority of the population currently is, but you can turn your camera on if you want to, but it's fine if you don't want to do that. If you can just make sure you've got your name up, that would be helpful so we can see who's here. Everybody is muted, and we're going to take any questions to all of our panelists through the chat. So if you've got questions, you can put them in at any point. And we'll pick them up with our speakers as we go through. And also, then it may be that some of those questions can be answered directly by the team that are working behind the scenes from PSC, so they may just answer some of those for you. We are going to record this, so I'm just letting people know that, mainly so that we can then send a link to you all of what has been said, so that you've got a record of that for anything you want to use in the future. And you can introduce yourself in the chat as Tracy just has done. So that would be good if people could say hello to each other if they want to. So I'm going to hand over straight away to Stephen Kinnock, who's the chair of the Britain-Palestine All-Party Parliamentary Group. He's going to speak for a couple of minutes, just a welcome. Oh, I should just say as well, sorry, this meeting is being co-hosted by Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Caabu, and the Britain-Palestine All-Party Parliamentary Group. So Stephen is going to speak for a couple of minutes about that, and then Jamal, who's the director from PSC, will also speak for a couple of minutes, and then we'll move on to our panelists. So I'm going to hand over to Stephen now, who will hopefully unmute himself and introduce himself. Thank you. I'm not sure if Stephen is still there. He looks like he might have frozen.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Ah, you're there. You're in two places, Stephen.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Oh, well, good. Okay, welcome. Thank you, Stephen. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you so much to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign for organising this and for putting together such an amazing panel of speakers. I won't say too much because we really need to get on to the panel. All I will say is that, you know, as the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Palestine, I'm really heartened to see the level of support that we're getting right across Parliament, and this really is a genuinely cross-party group. We have the other co-chair alongside myself on the APPG is Baroness Saida Wasi, and we have very prominent Conservative MPs such as Crispin Blunt and Flick Drummond, who are very active on the APPG. So it's a genuinely cross-party effort. I think the term existential crisis gets overused in modern political discourse, but it is no exaggeration at all to say that this annexation plan is an existential threat, both to the peace process and indeed to the state of Palestine. And I think we have to be absolutely alive to the fundamental risks that we're facing. It's a Rubicon moment. If we cross this Rubicon and we end up in a new reality on the other side, it's one I think that we can never come back from. So history, I think, will judge what happens over the next couple of months. And we, alongside all those who are campaigning internationally on this issue, are playing a crucial role, I think, in trying to prevent this appalling plan from coming into being. It shows utter contempt for the dignity and the aspirations and the rights of the Palestinian people. And I often reflect on, you know, imagine if a foreign power came to the British government and said, we've got a peace plan which involves us annexing 60% of your territory, having full control over your borders and over your natural resources. We would not see that as a peace plan. We would see that as a declaration of war. And I think we have to be absolutely clear that this so-called Trump plan is clearly deeply damaging, contradictory to international law, and we have to take urgent and purposeful action to stop this happening. And in that context, I'd very much like to pay tribute to my colleague Wayne David, MP, who is on the call. Wayne is the Shadow Minister for the Middle East. He's already up and running on this, even though the Shadow team was only put together quite recently. He's written to James Cleverly, the Middle East Minister, and also asked a piercing question in FCO orals yesterday, which did lead to Cleverly recognizing the fact that the annexation plan is utterly contradictory to international law. So I'm really glad that we have Wayne on the call today. I'd finally also very much like to pay tribute to the work that Caabu does. They are the secretariat for our APPG. We couldn't function without them, and they do a fantastic job, not least coordinating the letter that I'm sure you will have seen reported in the media, now signed by 145 MPs and peers, calling out the annexation and demanding that the British government take action to prevent it. There's of course the crucial meeting in Brussels, EU meeting on Friday. So this is very much an international effort, and Wayne, I know Wayne David is also at the heart of coordinating this international effort, leading up to this very important meeting in Brussels on Friday. And we hope that serious and tangible countermeasures will come out of that meeting. So I'd just like to thank all of you for the support that you're showing for the APPG and for this vitally important cause. And I look forward to working with all of you going forward. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Louise. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen. That was really informative, and thanks for raising the letter. I think it's a very important letter that Caabu have put together, and very good that so many of you signed it. So thank you for that. Right, I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to speak for a couple of minutes, and then we'll move on to our speakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're very pleased at PSC to be hosting today's briefing alongside our colleagues at the APPG and Caabu. This meeting obviously comes at a crucial moment, the nature of which I think was clearly articulated by the letter sent by over 150, I think was the final total of parliamentarians at the beginning of May. And Stephen, in commenting on that letter, used a phrase just reused in describing Israel's threat to move forward with plans to annex further swathes of the West Bank as a Rubicon moment. And he was right to do so. The letter indicated that the move would be a death knell for a two-state solution. I'm always obliged to say that PSC, as people will know, does not take a position on two states. We frame our advocacy for the Palestinian people within the context of the collective rights they are owed, and support any solution that they agree to that respects those rights underpinned in international law. But for those across Parliament, and there are many, of course, who affirm it as the only feasible political solution, then annexation would undoubtedly remove any lingering question there might be that there is any intention within the Israeli political mainstream to allow the creation of a viable Palestinian state. It's a Rubicon moment, I think, in another way. When I became the director of PSC only about 4 years ago, I was advised very clearly that when speaking to Parliament, I should never use the S word. Any talk about sanctions in relation to Israel was off the table, but here were over 150 parliamentarians grasping the reality that has been obvious for many years, that the momentum to continued settlement expansion and now to further annexation will not be halted without external pressure, meaning in clear language the threat of imposition of sanctions. Finally, I want to say this. We know it's very difficult in the context of the coronavirus to focus attention, understandably, on other issues of pressing concern. It's important to do so, and the fact that over 100 people have signed up, and we hope they all join us for this meeting, makes it clear that there is a recognition of the seminal moment that we are at. And it's also, I think, important that given the clear evidence as outlined in the letter that Israel intends to use this crisis to move forward with its illegal plans, that we do keep attention focused on Palestine. So we hope to be holding, in partnership with the APPG and Caabu, further briefings on Palestine using this format over the next few months. We want feedback from you. So everyone attending today will be sent an email in the next few days asking you for feedback and thoughts about topics for future briefings. It will take less than a minute of your time to fill it in. We ask you to do it. I thank you all for attending today, and I hand you back to Louise.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for that update, and please keep your eyes open for that email. So we're now going to move on to our speakers. So we're going to take the first two speakers. Michael Lynk is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Occupied Palestine Territories, and Saleh Higazi is from Amnesty International. He's the Middle East and North Africa Director in that region. So they're going to both do an introduction, and then we'll take some questions for them. So if you, as there's already a question in the chat, which I'll take, but if you've got other questions as they speak, just pop them into the chat and we'll take those. So we'll go to Michael first, and Michael, you should be able to unmute yourself because I can't see you.
How's that?
Lovely, thank you.
Great.
And welcome.
Listen, thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation to be part of this panel. It's a true honor to be involved in this parliamentary briefing, and I'm heartened to see that the current events in Israel and Palestine, particularly the looming annexation, are stirring both an interest in this issue, but also a concerted reaction to the announced plans by Israel's new coalition government. I've been asked to speak about the legality and the impact of both the Israeli settlements and about annexation. There's a lot to say, and I'll try my best to be concise and stay within the 10 minutes that I've been allocated. So let me first say that there are three areas of international law that are involved in my discussion: the law of occupation, the absolute prohibition against civilian settlements initiated by the occupying power in the occupied territory, and the absolute prohibition against the annexation of any of the occupied territory by the occupying power. So when we turn to the specific issue of Israel's presence in the Palestinian territory, there are three issues of law that are virtually uncontested by international lawyers and the international community, except for the Israeli government and now the American State Department. First, Israel is the occupying power in the Palestinian territory, which consists of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Therefore, the strict rules of the laws of occupation apply, which are particularly found in the Fourth Geneva Convention. Second, the Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, of which there are more than 240, with more than 650,000 settlers living in them, are profoundly illegal under international law. And third, Israel's prior annexation of East Jerusalem in 1980 and the Syrian Golan Heights in 1981 are profoundly illegal, and so would any further annexation of the West Bank that is due to occur according to the timetable laid out in the Trump plan and the coalition agreement after the 1st of July. So turning now to the settlements, there are 3 points I want to make with respect to their legality and their impact. First, the Israeli settlements violate the Fourth Geneva Convention's prohibition against civilian settlements, and they are a presumptive war crime under the 1998 Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court. The UN Security Council has said on at least 6 occasions that Israeli settlements breach international law. In its most recent resolution on this issue, which is in December 2016, the Security Council said that the settlements constitute, and I'm quoting, a flagrant violation under international law, unquote. The Council at the same time also, quoting, reiterated its demand that Israel immediately and completely cease all settlement activity, unquote, and called upon all states to differentiate between Israel and the occupied territories. I should say that on the day after the Security Council adopted this resolution in December 2016, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the resolution as, and I'm quoting, distorted, delusional, absurd, and part of the swan song of the old world. The second point I want to make on the settlements is to answer the question, why do we have this absolute prohibition in international law? It was because the framers of the 1949 Geneva Conventions wanted to codify into law the bitter lessons from the prior century, that annexation, settler implantation, and civilian settlements are the causes of war, wars of conquest, and immense human suffering. Settler implantation in particular was and is, for many colonial or occupying powers, the way to establish and grow a loyal civilian population, usually from the home country, that can make its rule over the acquired territory easier, to ensure domination of one group over another, and to create the basis for a lasting claim of sovereignty. So when we look at the history of settlement implantation projects, we see the kinds of examples that were in the minds of the drafters of the Geneva Conventions, as well as what is going on today. Historical examples would include the British settlement of Protestants in Catholic Ireland, the French in Algeria, the white South Africans and Germans in Namibia, the importation of Russians into the Baltic republics, and more recently, Moroccan settlers in Western Sahara, and the settlement of Han Chinese in Tibet and Xinjiang provinces in Western China. All of these tragedies are encapsulated in what I would call Israel's occu-annexation, which is a new word for the English language. Israel's settlements began in the summer of 1967, within a few months of the June 1967 war, and they're intended by the British leadership, the Israeli leadership then and now, to create facts on the ground, to establish a sovereign claim over some or all of the occupied Arab territories. No occupying power that is busy creating civilian settlements can be serious about ending its occupation or respecting the human rights of the indigenous people under occupation. My third and final point about the settlements is that they are the engine of the Israeli occupation, and great suffering is intertwined with them. If it wasn't for the settlements, the Israeli occupation would have no reason for continuing. Here are some quick facts about them. Almost 10% of the Israeli Jewish population now lives in the settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. This creates a huge pro-settlement and pro-annexation voting bloc in Israel, which is exactly what the Israeli leaders who advocated for the settlements intended. In the Israeli Knesset today, there are only two parties representing 18 seats out of 120 seats that are opposed to the settlements. The settlements, as well, are the most expensive and the grandest national project in the 72-year history of Israel. The settlements are heavily subsidized by the Israeli government in the form of lower mortgage rates, cheap housing, tax incentives, highways devoted only to Jewish settlers, and plenty of security. And as a result of these incentives, the growth of the Israeli settlement population has been, for many years, much higher than the growth of the Israeli Jewish population behind the 1949 lines. Let me now just briefly turn to the question of annexation and two quick points. First, it should be clear, annexation and territorial conquest are regarded as intolerable scourges from darker times. The Charter of the United Nations, adopted in 1945, requires UN members to settle their differences by peaceful means, with the corollary that annexation has become illegal. The UN Security Council, beginning with its famous Resolution 242 in 1967, has expressly affirmed the principle that the acquisition of territory by war or force is inadmissible on at least 8 occasions. And as an aside, the first appearance of this phrase, the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war or force, in the aftermath of the June 1967 war in the Middle East, it was the British ambassador to the UN at the time, Lord Caradon, who is the older brother of Michael Foot, who was the primary drafter of Resolution 242. And second, just let me briefly compare the situation in Israel-Palestine with another recent annexation. I'm putting to you that there's a startling disparity in the way in which the international community reacted to the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its approach to the 2 annexations undertaken by Israel 40 years ago and its continued defiance today. Within weeks of the Russian invasion and annexation, and within the UN Security Council, with the UN Security Council unable to act because of the Russian veto. Nevertheless, many of the most powerful players in the world enacted swift and comprehensive sanctions against Russia. They included the diplomatic downgrading of relations, including banishing Russia from the G8 and suspending its application to join the OECD, the freezing of assets and the imposition of travel restrictions against targeted individuals, import and export bans respecting goods coming from Crimea and Sevastopol, an array of economic sanctions against Russia, and restrictions on economic cooperation. They were imposed on Russia, notwithstanding that it is a significant international player politically and economically, that it has a population of 145 million people, and that Europe absorbed significant economic costs for taking these steps. Yet Israel, which is also illegally annexed territory, and which has faced censor on numerous points, as Amos Shokin, the publisher of Haaretz, the Israeli daily, wrote in 2016, with respect to the potential of serious measures coming from the international community, and I'm quoting, "The Israeli leadership will object and protest, but it may be that international pressure is precisely the force that will drive them to do the right thing." In conclusion, let me say that Israel learned an invaluable lesson 40 years ago when the international community condemned it for annexing East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, but was unwilling to impose political, diplomatic, or economic costs on Israel for doing so. It is highly doubtful that we'd be here today speaking about Israel's looming annexation of significant parts of the West Bank if the world had drawn real lines in the sand 40 years ago, or 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. As the old saying goes, the best time to plant an oak tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. If Israel carries through with Netanyahu's promise, then the chances for a genuine peace between Israel and Palestine in the foreseeable future will have gone, in my view, from implausible to unimaginable. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. That was really informative. Just before I move to Saleh, Andy Slaughter has shared in the chat an early day motion, which is about the annexation, so people can pick that up from the chat. I think we are going to save the chat anyway, and we can share any actions that are saved in there. There is also EDM 225, which is the response to the UN database, calling for a ban on trade with illegal settlements. So I'm sure James may be able to share a link to that into the chat as well at some point. So if people could look at those, but again, we will share those out. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Saleh. Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon and greetings from the occupied West Bank. Let me begin by expressing thanks to the organizers and everyone in attendance today. Thanks also to Professor Lynk for the presentation, which sets the important context for what I'm about to say. It is so important that we come together today to discuss the issues at hand and push for action that can stop the perpetuation of the human rights crisis in the occupied Palestinian territories and eventually, hopefully, put an end to violations. This is a crisis with many scary faces and layers, and at the heart of it sits the Israeli illegal settlement enterprise, which has been developed, maintained, and guarded unhinged over the years. Today, we have an annexationist government in Israel enjoying full support from the world's superpower, the United States. For us who care and want to promote human rights, action is imperative. And the key words here are justice and accountability. The situation is dire, but we are also presented with opportunities for accountability that need us to act on. There is the possible ICC investigation, which I will not get into today, but important to highlight as a strategic opportunity for justice, which requires all of our support as the court and its staff are actually under attack. Another opportunity that was presented to us this past February is the United Nations database compiled by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which lists more than 100 companies involved in business activities in illegal settlements, including companies that are domiciled in the United Kingdom. The database is a powerful mechanism that can assist states in identifying businesses domiciled in their territory and or under their jurisdiction that conduct activities in or with settlements. It is an important step towards states acting on their responsibility according to international law to ensure that there is a ban on settlement-related business activity, which is a call that is at the center of a campaign that we at Amnesty launched back in 2007 to mark 50 years of Israel's military occupation. Our call to ban business activity in or with the settlements is grounded in international law. Settlements are illegal. Businesses should not help sustain such an illegal situation, and states have a responsibility to ensure that this is the case. By instating a ban on business activity in or with settlement, states ensure an effective way of addressing the human rights situation on the ground in the occupied Palestinian territories. 50 years of military occupation have created reality for Palestinians embedded in systematic rights abuses and institutionalized discrimination. So please bear with me here as I list patterns that define the daily lives for millions of Palestinians today. Violations of the right to life. Israeli soldiers, police, security guards have unlawfully killed and injured many Palestinian civilians in the OPT, including during protests against the confiscation of land and the construction of settlements. UN agencies and fact-finding missions have also expressed concern about violence perpetrated by a minority of Israeli settlers aimed at intimidating Palestinian population. Violations of the right to liberty, security of the person, and equal treatment before the law. Palestinians in the OPT are routinely subjected to arbitrary detention, including through administrative detention, whereas settlers are subject to Israeli civil and criminal law. Palestinians are subject to a military court system, which falls short of international standards for the fair conduct of trials and administration of justice. Violations of the right to access an effective remedy for acts violating fundamental freedoms. Israel's failure to adequately investigate and enforce the law for acts of violence against Palestinians, together with the multiple legal, financial, and procedural barriers faced by Palestinians in accessing the court system, severely limit Palestinians' ability to seek legal redress. The Israeli High Court of Justice has failed to rule on the legality of settlements, as it considered the settlements to be a political issue that it is not competent to hear. Violations of the right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Israel's use of military orders to prohibit peaceful protest and criminalize freedom of expression in the occupied West Bank. Israeli forces have also used tear gas, rubber bullets, and occasionally live rounds to suppress peaceful protests, including against settlements and land confiscation. Violations of the right to equality and non-discrimination. Systematic discrimination against Palestinians is inherent in virtually all aspects of Israel's administration of the occupied Palestinian territories. Palestinians are also specifically targeted for a range of actions that constitute human rights violations. The Israeli government allows settlers to exploit land and natural resources that belong to Palestinians. Israel provides preferential treatment to Israeli businesses operating in the OPT while putting up barriers to or simply blocking Palestinian ones. Israeli citizens receive entitlements and Palestinians face restrictions on the grounds of nationality, ethnicity, and religion, in contravention of international standards. The Israeli authorities have created a discriminatory urban planning and zoning system. Within Area C, which is under full Israeli control, where most settlement construction is based, Israel has allocated 70% of the land to settlement and only 1% to Palestinians. In East Jerusalem, Israel has expropriated 35% of the city for the construction of settlements, while restricting Palestinians to construct on only 13% of the land. The UN has also pointed to discrimination against Palestinians in the way in which the criminal law is enforced. While prosecution rates for settler attacks against Palestinians are low, suggesting a lack of enforcement, most cases of violence against Israeli settlers are investigated and proceed to court. Violations of the right to adequate housing. Since the occupation in 1967, Israel has constructed tens of thousands of homes on Palestinian land to accommodate settlers, while at the same time demolishing tens of thousands of Palestinian homes and other structures, such as farm buildings and water tanks. Israel also carries out demolitions as a form of collective punishment against the families of individuals accused of attacks on Israelis. In East Jerusalem, about hundreds of houses have been demolished since 2004 for lack of permits. Israel also confiscates houses inhabited by Palestinians in the city to allocate them to settlers. by forcibly evicting and or demolishing their homes without providing adequate alternative accommodation. Other patterns of violations, which I will not go into in the same level of details, are violations to the right of freedom of movement, violations of the rights of the child, violations of the right to enjoyment of the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health, violations of the right to water, violations of the right to education, violations of the right to earn a decent living through work. Us at Amnesty International, UN bodies and other organizations have been systematically documenting these violations and other violations for decades. Listing them like this misses the stories of the many victims and the vast suffering endured by them on a daily basis. But these are there, meaning the stories, and can be found in the hundreds, if not thousands, of reports by organizations and the courageous human rights defenders working on the ground. Israel's policy of illegally settling its civilians in the OPT is a major driving force behind this list or kind of web of violations that I just drew in front of you. And they present the patterns of systematic and long-term human rights violations. Which brings me back to the point about business involvement and the crucial steps states, such as the UK, need to take to impose a ban on settlement activity, on business activity, in or with settlements. Any business activity in or with settlements unavoidably contributes to sustaining this illegal situation, as well as a regime that is inherently discriminatory and abusive of the human rights of Palestinians. Businesses must take action themselves. Those already engaged in or with settlements must stop immediately. Other companies need to ensure that they don't get involved. We at Amnesty have produced a guide to help businesses with this called Think Twice, which I'm sure I or colleagues will be happy to share with you. That said, states should not wait for proactive and positive action from the businesses and must act according to their obligations immediately. All states that are party to the 4th Geneva Convention, including the UK, are under an obligation to ensure respect for the Convention. The obligation to ensure respect requires positive action on the part of individual states. The duty to ensure respect includes third states taking the measures required to enforce compliance with international humanitarian law among those under their jurisdiction. Regulating the conduct of those under a state's jurisdiction to ensure compliance with international standards is now widely recognized as a legitimate means of ensuring respect for international human rights law in the context of business activity. This measure is equally relevant and necessary to ensure respect for the Geneva Conventions in relation to Israeli settlements in the OPT. Israel's settlement project entails serious breaches of preemptory norms, which give rise to certain additional duties among all states. These duties are the duty to cooperate to bring to an end, through lawful means, serious breaches, the duty to not recognize as lawful the situation created by such breaches, and the duty to not render aid or assistance in maintaining that situation. By banning business activity in or with settlements, and putting in place laws and regulations that stop companies from operating in Israeli settlements, governments worldwide, including the UK, have an opportunity to make a real difference to the lives of millions of Palestinians who have endured decades of injustice, indignity, and discrimination. The UK is in a position to effect positive human rights change in the OPT, and I urge all who can to act immediately so that it does so. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that. We're going to move on to questions now. We've had quite a few questions. We've had apologies from Diana Boutou. She is stuck in another meeting, so she isn't going to get to us. So we will have a bit more time for questions. So if you've got other questions, please do put them in the chat. Joseph Willits has just posted in about another letter that has been sent from Baroness Annalay to the Middle East Minister, and again has said that you can contact him privately to get it sent to you. So just keep an eye on the chat as well. So our first question is a very long question. So Michael and Saleh, if you want to just listen to these, I'm just going to do this one question because it's so long, and I'm happy for either of you or both of you to comment on it. So it's from Vincent Feen, and he says, if annexation happens, presumably Israel will declare products from the Jordan Valley to be Israeli produce, while the EU and UK will continue, rightly, to regard it as Palestinian produce. Can this legal uncertainty be used to deter annexation, since it calls into question Israeli preferential access to its biggest market? Michael, you look like you might be going to answer that.
Well, let me start first. I agree with the statement that Saleh made, and which is backed by Amnesty International, that settlement goods should not be able to come into the world marketplace. The fact that there is international and Israeli company investment into the settlements and into the industrial parks that Israel has created in the occupied territory is the economic oxygen that allows the settlements to continue to grow and thrive. I applaud the efforts of campaigners to try to get settlement goods to be properly labeled. You had a victory at the European Court of Justice in the fall with respect to labeling. We've had the same sort of decision here in Canada with our federal court, which is currently on appeal. But as admirable as those rulings are, it is insufficient. I think settlement goods, because they're produced by Israeli civilian settlements in occupied territory, as I said in the beginning of my talk, that amounts to a presumptive war crime under international law, but also under your law as well in the United Kingdom. Settlement goods should not be allowed to come into the European market or the British market under your preferential treatments. They should not be allowed to come in at all. There are precedents with respect to this. In northern Cyprus and in Crimea, the European Union has said that goods from Crimea, for example, can only come into the European market if they're approved by the Ukrainian government or by the Greek Cypriot government coming from northern Cyprus. I don't see why a similar stance could not be taken where settlement goods can only leave Israel and enter into the international market if that has the approval of the Palestinian Authority, which presumably they wouldn't be able to do that. That would, I think, would both send a particular cost to Israel, a political cost as well as an economic cost, and it would begin to, if you like, contract the kind of economic benefits that go with having these settlements and their ready access to the international market. So I call for the ban of settlement goods entering the international market, and that's something I think that should be on the agenda of those in the United Kingdom who wish to come up with comprehensive precedents for how to react to the looming annexation call.
Thank you. Saleh, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that was a great answer. So it all sums it up. We can move to other questions. Brilliant.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so there's a question coming from two people actually, which is around BDS. So can you confirm the current position on boycott, divestment and sanction? So one of the new MPs in Parliament was issued with a HP laptop, and they're asking what can we do to change procurement policy. I don't know, who wants to start on that?
Look, I will just say this. I'm, as the UN Special Rapporteur with respect to the occupied Palestinian territory, I don't take a position one way or the other with respect to BDS, because that goes in many ways beyond my mandate. But certainly insofar as it touches upon settlement goods, well, I've just told you what my position would be. I leave it to the wisdom of civil society to determine how else to carry that on with respect to boycotts or sanctions or divestment with respect to Israel itself.
Lovely, thank you. Saleh,
Just to say that Amnesty also does not take a position for or against boycotts. We do, though, believe that the call for boycott is a peaceful freedom, is a practice of freedom, peaceful freedom of expression that should be absolutely protected. I mean, what I was trying to highlight here, and what initiatives such as the UN database does, is basically try to expose the business links to Israeli settlements. And once proven, then there is a responsibility, well, on the businesses themselves, but also on states and individuals to take action accordingly. And so I hope that answers, I mean, when it comes to any questions related to that.
Lovely, thank you. The next question is from Tracy Braben. She asked about children in Israeli prisons. And can they be released, or have they been released due to the risk of contagion during the COVID crisis?
I'm not aware recently of any changes with respect to that. I do know that I and a number of other special rapporteurs have made a call in April with a general call with respect to a number of prisoners in Israeli jails who should be released if they present no imminent harm to Israeli or Palestinian public, and that includes the release of all children under Israeli detention. There is no good reason in the best of times for most of these children to be in detention, particularly with respect to the crimes that they're alleged to have been committed, and whatever justification there would be for holding any of the remaining ones, I think evaporates in the face of the coronavirus and the ability for prisons to be petri dishes for the spread of the disease.
Okay, Saleh?
Yeah, just to add, there are hundreds of Palestinian children currently held by Israel, including under administrative detention, so detention without charge or trial. These children, mostly, if not in Ofar military prison, are held inside of Israel in contravention to international law as well. So in a context such as the public health crisis that we're all experiencing, we call on all children to be released unless it is against their interest, which in a situation such as this does not really apply.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think my understanding from the latest Defence for Children International Palestine briefing is that there has been an increase in children being taken into prison during the crisis. So it's just worth people noting that there certainly hasn't been a reduction. Right, it's another long question, but it's a good one. So it's from Seema Malhotra. It says, can I ask about the legal point on settlements and how the Israeli High Court has ruled this is a political matter, not a legal matter on which it can rule? Has there been pushback on this from any groups within Israel, and is there any vehicle to change this?
I can start. He's absolutely correct, is that the Israeli High Court, which is another name for the Israeli Supreme Court, has never ruled in the 40 years of having these issues litigated in front of it on the question of the legality of the Israeli settlements under international law. The Israeli High Court recognizes both the Fourth Geneva Convention as well as the 1907 Hague Regulations, because Israel is a signatory to the 1949 Geneva Conventions. But it's always taken the consistent position that unless there's a technical aspect to the claim over whether or not a particular settlement is legal or not, it's a minor technical issue as whether or not it's been built on private Palestinian land. That kind of question aside, whether or not Israeli settlements breach the Fourth Geneva Convention, specifically Article 49, the Israeli High Court has consistently said that's a political question. It's not a legal question. Therefore, we're not going to rule upon that for legal doctrine. And therefore, this issue has never been fully litigated. There's been numerous attempts, both by Israeli civil liberties lawyers and by Palestinian lawyers appearing before the High Court to get the Supreme Court to change its mind with respect to this, and it's steadfastly held on to that. So what it means is that for those who say, well, why are the Palestinians going to international fora to want to litigate the issue of the legality of settlements, be it in the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court? We have a robust judicial system in Israel. That's the answer to that Israeli claim, that the High Court refuses on perhaps the most important legal question facing Israel today with respect to the continuation of the occupation and the legality of settlements, that the Israeli court refuses to do that. In some ways, I think that means that the Israeli court has become the handmaiden of the Israeli occupation if it refuses to rule on the most single important legal question governing the occupation.
Thank you, Saleh.
Can I just add quickly? I mean, it is our view that the Israeli High Court, Supreme Court, and the justice system more generally play a crucial role in advancing these illegal policies, settlements, and coupled with kind of myriad of violations that I've just listed in my intervention. Take, for example, the village of Khan al-Ahmar that has been approved by the Supreme Court for demolition. So the courts are complicit in this. And not only that, I mean, if you look at the case of Omar Shakir, HRW's Israel and Palestine director, who was kicked out of the country last year, in the Supreme Court ruling, it is always read that that the court has confirmed that that's not even allowed to criticize Israel's policy of settling civilians in the occupied Palestinian territories. So it even goes beyond supporting the actual advancement of the policy, but also preventing people from criticizing it.
Great, thank you. Right, we've got a couple more questions and we've got time to take a couple more. So Arthur Goodman asks, would annexation itself create anything that couldn't be reversed by the United States if Joe Biden becomes the next president?
Good question. I suppose it's a matter of human agency, and any decision by human agency could always be reversed by human agency. But Vice President Biden made it clear that he didn't think it was wise to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But it having been done, he's not prepared to reverse that and move the embassy back to Tel Aviv. If the annexation does come in after the 1st of July, that's still almost 8 months before he would become president, should he win in November. I would have a hard time imagining, for someone who's got natural sympathies towards the Israeli political leadership, that he would wind up reversing all or even some of the annexation move. One may remain hopeful, but the particular wing of the Democratic Party that he winds up representing has long shown great sympathy for Israel. It may mildly criticize the settlements. It may mildly criticize the annexations, but it's shown to have no appetite to use its large menu of trade deals or arm deals in order to be able to compel Israel to undo some of its most destructive policies. So I remain hopeful that, but without feeling that it ever would happen, that the Biden administration may do something different if it assumed office in January 2021.
Thank you. Saleh, do you want to add anything?
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay, there's another question from Vincent Feen. Given the diverse opinion within the EU, what practical countermeasures do you think will come from the EU?
Well, without claiming to be an expert on the EU, I certainly know that there are intense divisions which will probably manifest themselves at the upcoming meeting of the EU foreign ministers later on this week with respect to the question of annexation. I think the biggest issue will be the willingness of Borrell to be able to speak independently without having necessarily the consent of all 27 to say the degree to which the EU disapproves of any annexation measures. And I think you'll find that there's enough countries, the leaders would be obviously Sweden or Luxembourg or Ireland, who will take the lead, but other major countries, I think certainly I've heard strong statements coming from France, would be willing to take unilateral sanctions measures within their own national jurisdiction to cut off some aspects of their trade relationships with Israel, maybe to downgrade diplomatic relations for a period of time. I think as we've seen with respect to the reaction of the European Union on the annexation of Crimea, there's a wide range of menu options to choose from that all countries, including countries in the EU, have to do this. And I'm sure that's a calculation that Israel is assessing right now as to whether or not it's going to go ahead with the full 30% that it's promised, or may do something more minor. my message is this, my hope is this. If Israel is accurately reading the tea leaves with respect to at least the promise that there would be some kind of concerted European action on sanctions or countermeasures to Israel should annexation go forward on the 1st of July. And the same thing would be true with respect to your political considerations as well, that if Israel adopted a more modest annexation, say they annex only the settlements around Jerusalem, or they only annex the Jordan Valley, the last thing I would hope would be that your country or the Europeans would say, whew, we missed a big bullet. They only did a minor annexation instead of a major annexation. I would hope that your reaction with respect to the measures that you would bring in to show your absolute disapproval of annexation would not be any different with respect to this. I think there has to be a clear message. As I said, you know, has to be done today. That wasn't done 40 years ago, and that taught Israel absolutely the wrong lesson with respect to what the international community would do if it took such fateful steps of annexing occupied territory.
Okay, Saleh, anything to add?
Not much. I'm also not an expert on EU, but I certainly hope that if there's no possibility for a collective action, that individual states do take that into their own hands.
Lovely. Okay, I've got another question. It probably is going to, we may be able to get another one depending on length of answer of this one, but it's from Hussein Khalidi. It says, in many ways, Israel has already de facto annexed Area C of the West Bank. Practically speaking, how different will life be for Palestinians on the ground following formal annexation?
Saleh, why don't you take that first?
Sure, thanks, Michael. Not different at all. What I just described in my presentation, this kind of a web of systematic human rights abuses just continue, and they will, with this de jure annexation announcement or the expected one, Israel will continue to impose a system of institutionalized discrimination on Palestinians. And looking at East Jerusalem, an area that has been illegally annexed since 1967, is a good indication for how things are. That does not change anything with regards to the lives of Palestinians and the abuses that they face on a daily basis.
If I can say quickly, in my mind, as a lawyer, I see no difference between the so-called de facto annexation and de jure annexation. Both would be profoundly illegal under international law. And what Israel has been doing, since the summer of 1967, when it began its very first settlements, up until now, has been a deliberate, calculated form of de jure annexation, which then would build up a sufficient critical mass of settlements and size of settlers to be able to make the argument for de jure, formal annexation. Both, I think, are illegal under international law. In many ways, the move to formally annex, if it comes to the full fruition, 30% of the West Bank, this changes everything and it changes nothing. It changes everything in the sense that a formal annexation of territory is the culmination of an illegal act. And it always is going to draw the world's attention to this with regards to that, as it should. But in some ways, it changes nothing, because the formulation for what happens the day after annexation, certainly for the Palestinians, in terms of where they can move, where they can work, what access they would now have to their expropriated lands, what roads they can and can't wind up driving on in the West Bank, none of that in reality would really ever change. So formal annexation maintains the same system of domination and subjugation that had occurred before the annexation. The only difference is that it's meant to make it formalized and crystallized, with Israel now claiming formal sovereignty over these particular lands. Either way, this is an imperative moment, though. I don't want to downplay the imperative moment we're reaching, is that this has to be opposed, and Israel and the United Kingdom and Europe in particular have to show the same resolve, the same swift resolve that was lacking before, but that it showed in 2014 with respect to Crimea. Any annexation in the world is illegal. Any annexation like this deserves to have the full array of international sanctions made against it to bring the perpetrator back in line with its international obligations. You know, at the end of the day, international law is the promise that states make to their peoples and to peoples everywhere in the world that they will wind up they have rights that will be recognized, and when trampled upon will wind up being defended and fulfilled. And this is exactly the moment to be able to show that that promise of international law remains true.
Thanks, Michael, and I think that was a very powerful contribution. We are sort of out of time, really. I just want to point to something that Rohan Talbot has just posted in the chat, which is quite an important point about the change of direction of the government around annexation. So people should have a quick look at that. Just to sum up, really, I want to thank Michael and Saleh for their contributions. They were excellent. It has been commented on in the chat about how clear your contributions were and how informative. So thank you very much for that. For all of you that have joined us, thank you very much for giving up your time. I know people are very busy. As we said at the start, we've recorded this and we will be sharing that with you. So people have asked a couple of times in the chat, we will be sharing that. And we will also save the chat and make sure we share that with you, the relevant bits of that with you that have got links to important parts or events within it. And again, just a reminder around the 2 EDMs, please make sure that you have a look at those and sign them if you haven't already done so. And again, keep an eye open for the email that Ben referred to that will be coming out to you, asking for your views about other things you would like to look at in the future in terms of these briefings. We think that they're really important and will help to keep you informed and updated about what is happening currently. Again, thank you to PSC, thank you to Stephen from the APPG for hosting this, and Caabu. We think it's been a really good event and we hope that you have found it helpful, and we will keep you updated. Thank you very much for all of your time, and we will see you all soon. Take care. Thank you.